Story 1. Dashrath Manji, also known as the Mountain Man, was an Indian laborer from Galar village near Gaya in the state of Bihar. When his wife died in 1959 from injuries caused by a fall from a mountain, and because the mountain blocked timely access to a nearby hospital, he decided to carve a passage through a ridge of hills using only a hammer and a chisel. He carved a path 110 meters long, 1 meters wide, and 7 meters deep, about 360 feet long, 30 feet wide, and 25 feet deep. After 22 years of work, Manji shortened travel between the Atri and Vajragunj blocks of Gaya district from 34 miles to 9 miles. He said, "When I started hammering the hill, people called me a lunatic, but that steeled my resolve." Though mocked for his efforts, Manji's work made life easier for the people of Galar village. Story 2. Japanese volunteers aged 60 or older volunteered to fix problems at the Fukushima nuclear power plant, knowing they would likely die of natural causes before radiation harmed them. I do not know if they actually did it, though. Story 3. Joseph Bazalgette was a Victorian engineer who masterminded London's modern sewer system in the 1860s. He foresaw the rapid population growth, and when all the calculations were made on how big to bore the pipes underground, he essentially said, "No, let us double it." Infrastructure that would have been unable to cope in the 1960s is still in use today. Story 4. During the Napoleonic Wars, a Royal Navy admiral, when on leave, would wander his country estate planting oak trees to provide timber for naval ships. It is estimated the trees are now mature and ready for use. Story 5. Many examples in this thread are familiar, though they are still great. One example not often mentioned is the Korean script Hangul. King Sejong created the alphabet so people would not have to continue using the adopted Chinese Hanja, which were complicated and difficult to learn. His goal was to increase literacy across all levels of society, not just among the wealthy elite. It received pushback from the wealthy elite, but following the end of Japanese colonialism in the early 20th century, it gained popularity and is now the official written language in both North Korea and South Korea. Story 6. The preservation of Chowvat Cave is unparalleled in archaeology. From day one, the 3 explorers who discovered it took the utmost care to leave as little trace as possible in the unopened, pristine chapel of charcoal and ochre. There are strict limits and guidelines for traversing the cave. Access is restricted to research, and tourism is prohibited. We have learned a great deal about the site because of their forethought. Story 7. William Wilberforce campaigned in the British government for more than 40 years to end slavery. He helped abolish the slave trade throughout the British Empire with the Slave Trade Act of 1807, and later helped end slavery itself with the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833. He died 3 days after hearing that the Slavery Abolition Act had passed in Parliament, after a lifetime of campaigning. He is buried in Westminster Abbey, which is reserved for monarchs and prominent national figures. His campaign for abolition provided a blueprint later followed by other abolitionists, including Abraham Lincoln. Many generations live today because of his efforts. He was also a founding member of the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. Story 8. The Voyager spacecraft. One of them is the only human-made object to have left the solar system. They are still sending back data, and each carries a gold record encoded with information, our planet's greeting card to the cosmos. It is hard to overstate how much that project changed humanity's knowledge of the solar system. The Voyager probes were crucial to discovering volcanoes on Jupiter's moon Io, the first volcanic activity confirmed outside of Earth. Before the Voyager mission, Earth-based telescopes had thought there were only a handful of rings around Saturn. Voyager found thousands of additional rings, discovered thin ring systems around 2 other outer planets, discovered dozens of moons, and gathered far more information than a single comment can do justice to. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration is still planning future missions based on information the Voyager spacecraft discovered. If alien life is discovered on Europa or Titan, you can thank the Voyager engineers and scientists. Most of them could have earned far more money in the private sector. Being part of this effort was their dream job. They will not see this work through to the end because Voyager began the planning stages 50 years ago. Human lives are not long enough, and they knew it. There is a fully functional third Voyager spacecraft that was never launched. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration built it and kept it on Earth for engineers to use in troubleshooting if the two Voyager probes in space ever encountered unexpected problems. That third Voyager spacecraft spends most of the time on display at the National Aeronautics and Space Administration Jet Propulsion Laboratory facility in California, in the Von Karman Auditorium. Every June, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory conducts tours open to the public. For security reasons, they cannot admit large numbers of visitors on site, but the tour is free. Applications opened on April 3rd. The Jet Propulsion Laboratory is usually described as in Pasadena, but it is actually in the smaller nearby city of La Canada-Flintridge. If you can obtain a ticket, you will spend part of the tour face-to-face with that third Voyager spacecraft, and you might also get to see the Jet Propulsion Laboratory moon rock. Story 9. The Cassini family map was the first of its kind for France. It took 4 generations of the same family and 6 decades to complete. Imagine being the second generation. Your father spends his life working on the map. You spend your life continuing it while raising your son to do the same, and it still takes another lifetime to finish. Story 10. In a very literal sense, these were the landscape gardens created by Capability Brown. He carefully crafted them, directing the planting of trees and shrubs to create a beautiful vista that would take decades to mature and fulfill his vision. Story 11. Norway's sovereign wealth fund could have been spent by that generation, who might have taken a selfish view and taken the cash, or politicians could have gone on a vote-buying spree. Instead, it is invested and managed independently for the benefit of future generations. Story 12. King Afonso III of Portugal began planting pines in Leiria in the 13th century. This area is now known as the Pinhal de Leiria and was intended to stop the advance of sand dunes. King Dinis expanded it to its current size between 1279 and 1325. It is said that whenever they cut trees, they planted more so the forest would never disappear. Beyond protecting against dunes and safeguarding agricultural land, the Pinhal de Leiria is best known for supplying wood for ships during the Portuguese Age of Discovery, which ushered in the country's greatest period of prosperity. The forest may not have been planted with that objective in mind, but the kings who ordered the planting did so knowing they would not reap many benefits in their lifetimes. It nevertheless became critically important centuries later. In 2017, 86% of the forest burned in wildfires. Much of the area remains destroyed. Less than half of the burned area has been replanted, and most regrowth has occurred naturally rather than through government replanting efforts. Story 13. My favorite is the tree root bridges in Meghalaya. Meghalaya has a monsoon season in which it receives the vast majority of its annual rainfall, so many small streams become impassable, raging rivers. To get around, people developed a method of creating very strong bridges by guiding tree roots to grow across chasms. This is a slow process that takes several generations of care. After passing the knowledge and responsibility to their children and grandchildren, they end up with a strong bridge that can last hundreds of years. Story 14. Nikolai Vavilov, a Russian botanist, and his fellow researchers starved themselves to death to preserve the Leningrad seed bank, which came under heavy German attack during the siege of Leningrad in 1943. Story 15. Roosevelt and the national parks. If he had not acted, there would be no national parks today. Corporate greed would have wiped them all out. Story 16. People get to see the opening of a rail line, a bridge, or several, but the integrated network of public infrastructure took 100 years to develop and is still expanding. Story 17. Mabel Ping Hua Lee was a suffragette, but because she was not a United States citizen, she knew that even if she succeeded, she would still not be able to vote. Story 18. Everyone who received the polio vaccine never got their childhood back, and none of the children who suffered from polio did either. Story 19. The great cathedrals of Europe, such as Notre Dame, took more than 100 years to build. The person who began construction would spend their whole life on it, knowing they would not live to see it completed. Story 20. Sorry, I am a bit late to the party. The mayor of Fudai in Japan, who as a young man survived the 1933 tsunami and saw bodies being recovered afterward, went into politics to have a seawall built to protect the town from another tsunami. Construction began in 1972 and took 12 years. At the time, the town considered it a waste of taxpayers' money. In 2011, when the worst tsunami to hit Japan struck, the village was barely touched. He died in the late 1980s and never saw his efforts fulfilled, but he is considered a hero because his work saved many lives. His name was Kotaku Wamura. Story 21. The insulin patent was sold for $1. We managed to mess that one up, but it still counts as planting trees, even if we are too foolish to sit in the shade. Story 22. That's not a Greek proverb. It's the invention of a 20th century Quaker writer, whose creation was appropriated in the 1990s by politicians in the United States Congress. They added the byline Greek proverb to seem more intelligent. Story 23. The Oxford English Dictionary is dramatized in the movie The Professor and the Madman. The dictionary is never finished, but the work continues. Story 24. Jonas Salk refused to patent the polio vaccine or to seek any profit from it in order to maximize its global distribution. During a famous television interview, Edward R. Murrow asked Salk who owned the patent. "Well, the people, I would say," Salk responded. "There is no patent. Could you patent the sun?" Story 25. Joseph Bazalgette, the man who designed London's sewers in the 1860s, said, "We are only going to do this once, and there is always the unforeseen." He doubled the pipe diameter. If he had not done this, the system would have overflowed in the 1960s. Story 26. Susan B. Anthony spent her entire life working to secure women's right to vote. She was fined for attempting to vote and spent years organizing people to fight for the cause. She died in 1906, a decade before the 19th Amendment was ratified. Story 27. My friend's wife, an organic chef and farmer, was diagnosed with cancer and died in the prime of life, leaving behind a grieving widower with a preschool child. As she lay dying, she got up and planted the next crop of vegetables, which she knew would not be harvested by her. Her memorial was held in a big greenhouse on the cooperative farm. People shared foods made from her recipes with her vegetables. She literally lived this proverb. Story 28. Nye Bevan created the National Health Service in 1948 and died in 1960. He was an absolute legend. Sadly, his legacy has been slashed to tatters and continues to take damage. Story 29. Mendel discovered the seeds of the hereditary system in the mid-19th century. If I recall correctly, no one took it seriously until the early 20th century, about 30 years after his death. Story 30. During the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King Jr. knew he would not be alive to see integration. Story 31. Benjamin Franklin left $1,000 to both Boston and Philadelphia in a special trust that could not be touched for 100 years but did not become fully available until 200 years later. In 1990, Boston discovered that its $1,000 had grown to $4. $5 million thanks to careful management by the Franklin Institute. Philadelphia received about $2 million because the city allowed its board of trustees to assume control after the first 100 years. Inflation calculators are not well suited for that time span, so long-term adjustments are uncertain. Story 32. George Washington refused to be a king so that a fair society would have a chance to endure. Story 33. The Swedish king Gustav Vasa planted an entire forest of oaks for building battleships. The first batch was ready in 1975, a mere 400 years later. No tree was allowed to be cut down unless needed to ensure we would have the best ships in the world. Story 34. Older Japanese volunteers worked to clean sites contaminated by radiation from the World War II bombings. They knew they would likely not live long enough to suffer the worst effects of radiation, so they did it to protect younger people and to restore Japan for future generations. It is heartwarming. Story 35. I live in Denmark. The health service I received today was built over 70 years during the 20th century, expanded greatly under Thorvald Stauning, who is widely regarded as the greatest Danish prime minister, and became completely free in the 1970s. Now the right keeps trying to dismantle a system that works. Every time a flaw appears, it is a direct result of mismanagement by right-wing, liberal, and libertarian parties. The healthcare reform of 2007 was the single worst piece of Danish legislation ever enacted. It focused on centralization, attempting to cut costs by closing small local hospitals and opening mega hospitals. Story 36. I'm more interested to know when and why so many older people stopped planting and caring about trees to begin with. It is not as shady these days as the shade they enjoyed in their youth from their elders. Edited to add. You all know I'm not really talking about trees, right? Story 37. The national parks in the United States had the foresight to know they needed protection and did something about it. Imagine what would happen these days. There would be apartment buildings in Yellowstone if someone could make money from it. Story 38. 17th century mathematician John Napier spent 20 years calculating logarithmic tables that made calculations much easier. He died before he published them, and his son made them available to the world. Story 39. Is a poor society one that cuts down the trees whose shade your children will never sit under? Story 40. Hopefully we will soon include nuclear fusion reactors on the list. Story 41. Raphael Lemkin was a Polish lawyer who worked tirelessly to make genocide a crime. He became interested after World War I when he realized there was no law with which to charge the perpetrators of the Armenian genocide. After a young Armenian survivor assassinated one of the architects of the Armenian genocide, the survivor was tried for murder. Lemkin remarked, "It is a crime for Tellurian to kill a man, but it is not a crime for his oppressor to kill more than 1,000,000 men." Lemkin loved history and discovered that genocides occurred throughout history, so he fought to make genocide an international crime. He was in the United States when World War II broke out in his native country, and he lost multiple family members in the Holocaust. Because of his tireless efforts, genocide became an international crime during his lifetime, but he died before many countries, including the United States, had ratified related conventions. He received some recognition at the time but died penniless in New York and gained wider recognition posthumously in the 1990s when his laws were used to prosecute perpetrators of genocide. Most of this information comes from the book, A Problem from Hell, America and the Age of Genocide by Samantha Power, in which Lemkin is featured heavily at the beginning. At the Nuremberg trials, the Nazis were prosecuted successfully, but only for crimes that occurred after Germany invaded another country. By inference, if the Nazis had exterminated the entire German Jewish population but never invaded Poland, they would not have been liable at Nuremberg. Lemkin believed a specific genocide law was still necessary and continued to fight for it. Story 42. Sydney Harbour Bridge. When it was built, there were not enough cars in New South Wales to cause a traffic jam on it. 100 years later, it works exactly as it should. Story 43. On a simpler scale, leaving a home or vehicle for your children makes a huge difference as they start their lives. Having the ability to be mobile where public transport is inadequate is a major economic and psychological advantage. Having a place to stay while saving money on rent or a mortgage can catapult their lifelong prospects for success. I could take out a reverse mortgage to fund my retirement, but leaving assets to the children over time should be a family goal. Story 44. Bridges you did not ask for, pay for, earn, or build them. You were given a convenient way to cross natural barriers that would otherwise require massive detours. Story 45. Carnegie Libraries. Andrew Carnegie donated the money to build more than 2,500 libraries. Story 46. Many electronic music devices use a protocol called Musical Instrument Digital Interface to communicate with each other. Dave Smith, who led the development, made the technology open source. The protocol is now used in lighting, the guitar world, and many other applications he had not envisioned. His contribution to the music industry is enormous, yet few people outside synthesizer enthusiasts know his name. Story 47. Since his presidency, Jimmy Carter has devoted himself to public service, building houses for people in need nearly every day. He is the old man planting trees whose shade he will not enjoy. Story 48. I would like to hear about examples from the last, say, 40 years. I know there have been some, but it feels like all of those trapdoors have been closed and it is everybody for themselves. Story 49. I do not know much about George Washington since I am not from the United States, but setting the precedent of term limits was probably a significant development. Story 50. At some point, American feminists in the 1800s realized they would not achieve the presidential vote in their lifetime. If I recall correctly, it was Elizabeth Cady Stanton who wrote to another activist about the need to lay the groundwork for the next generation so they could carry on the torch. I heard the letter read aloud in a documentary. It was incredibly moving to hear how pragmatically she helped build a future she would never get to share. Story 51. In 6th grade, I was part of a leadership class. We always organized fundraisers and small events for our school. Our last fundraiser did so well that halfway through the school year we had to make a decision. 1. Rent bouncy castles for a day so the whole school could play on the field. 2. Buy brand new laptops for our classrooms, although not much work had been done on this option yet. 3. Replace the old, rusted jungle gym on the playground that had been there since the 60s, plus add new basketball hoops, footballs, and miscellaneous equipment. With the third option, we were 6th graders who would not see any of it. The next year, we would be graduating to middle school and leaving. It would benefit the children below us and future generations. We chose that option. I no longer live in my hometown, but when I visit, I see it there. The other day, my brother sent me a picture of my niece playing on that playset. I am so glad we did not pick the computers. Story 52. Every immigrant and refugee who left the home and culture they knew to start over, often without money and frequently scorned and discriminated against where they arrived, did so in the hope that their children would have a better life than they or their ancestors had. Story 53. Many examples exist throughout history because every great civilization works this way. The seeds for greatness are planted long before golden ages bear fruit. Consider the past few centuries and the Age of Enlightenment and its impact on slavery. Society improved when slavery was abolished. Writers, artists, scholars, and politicians in the Enlightenment in the 18th century began promoting new ideas about the nation-state and the rights of the individual and so on. That intellectual shift made the notion of humans as property increasingly untenable. Enlightenment thinkers knew they might not live to see a world without slavery, but their ideas helped lead Britain, the Netherlands, and other European powers to be among the first to outlaw slavery worldwide. They were then the first to enforce abolition with their navies, while the rest of the world slowly caught up. Slavery still exists today in Africa, in Asia, and elsewhere, so there are places where those seeds still need to be planted. Story 54. Everyone who chooses teaching as a profession is underpaid. We do it because we love young people and are passionate about what we teach. Story 55. Johnny Appleseed was a man who went around the United States of America distributing apple seeds. Now we are spoiled for choice thanks to his passion. Story 56. From my perspective as an outsider, the greatest American president was Teddy Roosevelt because of his conservation legacy. The vast protected natural areas in the United States can be attributed to his forthright vision of how necessary conservation was. He was also an inspiration for other countries in this regard. He saw what overgrazing did to land and what overhunting did to animal species, some of which he learned from firsthand experience, and he took action. For those who are into numbers, 230 million acres of public land were established during his presidency. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.